They laughed at her the moment she stepped into boot camp. Too small, too quiet, too weak, that's what everyone said. While others shouted and bragged, she stayed silent, choosing instead to help, to encourage, to lift others up when no one else would. But one night, inside the barracks, everything changed. The commander walked in, caught sight of her back tattoo, and in an instant, the room froze. No one laughed again, because behind that ink was a story of sacrifice, courage, and a strength deeper than anyone had imagined. This is Elena's story. The first morning of boot camp was always brutal. Sleep-deprived recruits stumbled into line, still trying to remember how to stand at attention without fidgeting. But for Private Elena Torres, the brutality wasn't just in the drills or the push-ups. It was in the whispers. Elena the lightweight, she'll never make it. Look at her arms, no muscle at all. The other recruits didn't bother hiding their smirks. Elena was smaller than most, quieter too, and that made her an easy target. By the third day, they'd started calling her featherweight right to her face. But Elena never lashed back. Instead, she helped others tie their boots faster, reminded them of the steps they kept forgetting, even shared protein bars from her stash when someone skipped breakfast. The same recruits who mocked her found themselves benefiting from her quiet kindness, yet none of them seemed to notice. One night, in the barracks, after lights out, Elena lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. Her back ached from push-ups, her arms from rifle drills. But what hurt most wasn't the pain. It was the laughter, the way it dug deeper than any muscle burn. Still, she whispered to herself, "Keep going. You're here for more than just you." The breaking point came 2 weeks in. During a long march under the blazing sun, one of the bigger recruits, Jenkins, a self-proclaimed real soldier, collapsed, his canteen bone dry. Others kept walking, too exhausted to care, but Elena dropped beside him, lifting his heavy pack onto her own shoulders. She coaxed him up, step by painful step, until they reached camp. Nobody said thank you. That night, as the others laughed in their corner, Elena pulled her shirt over her head to change. For the first time, her back was exposed, and that's when the room went silent. Across her shoulder blades stretched a tattoo, delicate yet impossible to miss. A pair of angel wings wrapped around a name written in careful script. "Wait, what's that say?" one recruit whispered. Elena froze, tugging her shirt down. But the commander, who had just entered for inspection, caught sight of it. His voice, usually sharp as steel, suddenly softened. "Torres," he said, almost to himself. "That name, was he your brother?" The room held its breath. Elena nodded. "Sergeant Miguel Torres, killed in action 2 years ago. He was the reason I joined." Her voice wavered, but she stood tall. "I wanted to finish what he started, to serve, to be the kind of soldier he believed I could be." The commander's face hardened again, but this time not out of anger. His jaw clenched as if holding back emotion. "I knew your brother. He saved 2 men in my unit, including me." The recruits shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their mockery crashing down on them. The girl they had ridiculed carried a story heavier than any pack, a reason stronger than any insult. From that moment, everything changed. The teasing stopped, the nicknames vanished, and though no one said it aloud, the recruits began to follow Elena's lead. When someone lagged in drills, Elena was the first to circle back, and suddenly others did too. When Jenkins stumbled again, 2 recruits rushed to grab his arms before Elena even had to move. Kindness, it turned out, was more contagious than cruelty. By graduation day, Elena was no longer featherweight. She was Torres, respected, steady, and quietly fierce. As they stood in formation, the commander called her name for a commendation in front of the entire company. "She reminded us," he said, his voice carrying across the field, "that strength isn't measured by how loud you shout or how heavy you lift. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one carrying someone else's burden." Elena blinked against the sting of tears, her brother's name warm against her back. And as the recruits tossed their caps into the air that afternoon, no one mocked her anymore. Instead, they lined up to shake her hand, one by one. Because in the end, Elena hadn't just survived boot camp. She had transformed it. She had proved that kindness wasn't weakness. It was the kind of strength that left a mark deeper than any tattoo. Message: true strength doesn't come from muscles, ranks, or bravado. It comes from compassion, from carrying others when they can't walk alone. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who teaches everyone else what it means to be human. Got it. I'll continue the story in English, keeping the same heartfelt tone, uplifting message, and narrative flows so it feels like a natural extension. Here's the continuation. The weeks after graduation carried a different rhythm. Elena's fellow recruits were scattered into their first assignments, but no matter where they landed, her name carried weight. Stories spread quickly through the ranks. About the girl who carried another soldier's pack without hesitation, about the tattoo that silenced a whole barracks, about the quiet strength that couldn't be measured by push-ups or speed. Some recruits who had once mocked her even wrote letters. Jenkins sent one first. "Torres, I owe you more than I admitted. You carried me when I had nothing left. I thought strength was about size. Turns out, I didn't know the meaning of it until you showed me. Thank you." Elena read the letter under her bunk light, folding it carefully into her journal beside a photograph of her brother. She smiled faintly. Forgiveness came easy to her. It always had. Months later, Elena found herself deployed overseas. The air was thick with heat and dust, the kind that clung to your lungs. The days were long, filled with patrols and drills, but the mocking laughter that once trailed her in boot camp was nowhere to be heard. Here, every soldier relied on the other. Here, kindness wasn't optional, it was survival. During one tense night mission, her squad came under sudden fire. The world erupted in chaos, shouts, bursts of light, the ground trembling beneath explosions. Amid it all, Elena noticed a young medic frozen in place, his hands shaking too badly to move. She didn't think twice. "Breathe," she told him, her voice calm despite the storm. "You're not alone. We'll do this together." She guided his trembling hands as they patched a wounded soldier. Step by step, word by word, she anchored him until the panic left his eyes. By the end of the night, 3 lives had been saved, including the medic's own courage. The next morning, the commander pulled her aside. "Your brother would be proud," he said simply. Elena didn't answer. She only touched her tattoo, the ink warm under the desert sun. Over time, the squad began to mirror her again, just as her boot camp peers once had. Soldiers stopped snapping at each other under pressure. They checked in more, shared more. Small acts of kindness, sharing a canteen, steadying a trembling hand, cracking a quiet joke in the darkest hours, became their way of surviving together. And whenever someone asked where it started, they pointed to Elena, the girl who had been mocked for being too small, too weak, the girl whose back told a story of loss but whose heart carried everyone else forward. Years later, long after deployments and long after boot camp, Elena returned home to visit the memorial wall. Her fingers traced her brother's name etched in stone. She thought of the recruits who had once laughed at her, and how many of them had gone on to become leaders in their own right. She thought of the medic who had written her years later, saying, "I wouldn't be here without you." And in that quiet moment, Elena understood something. Her brother hadn't just left her his courage. He had left her a legacy to pass on. Final message. In the end, Elena proved that kindness is not just an act, it's a chain reaction. One small choice to carry someone else's burden can ripple outward, changing not only a single life but an entire generation of soldiers. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't strength or firepower, it's humanity. Perfect. Let's keep the story going in English, carrying forward Elena's journey with the same heartfelt, inspiring tone. I'll build naturally from where we left off. Months turned into years, and Elena's name continued to echo through the ranks, not because she sought glory, but because of how she made others feel. She was the soldier who never left anyone behind, the one who listened when others broke down, the one who carried more than her share without complaint. But Elena never thought of herself as special. She still saw herself as the same quiet girl who once lay awake in a boot camp barracks, wondering if she truly belonged. One autumn morning, she received unexpected orders. She was to return to the very training base where it had all started. This time, not as a recruit, but as an instructor. The barracks looked the same, the scuffed floors, the echo of boots hitting the ground, the sharp bark of orders in the air. Yet now Elena stood on the other side, watching a new group of nervous recruits shuffle into line. She recognized the fear in their eyes, the doubt, the weight of wanting to prove themselves. Among them was a young woman, smaller than the rest, shoulders hunched as though trying to make herself invisible. Elena noticed the way the others whispered, the way they smirked behind her back. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. That evening, as the recruits changed after drills, Elena stepped forward. She removed her jacket, exposing the familiar tattoo that still stretched across her back, her brother's name framed by wings. The room grew quiet, just as it had years ago. She told them her story, not to boast, but to remind them that strength doesn't always look the way people expect it to. She spoke of failure, of doubt, of carrying someone else's weight even when her own knees shook. By the time she finished, the smirks had disappeared. The recruits no longer looked at the smaller girl with ridicule, they looked at her with respect. And that night, Elena realized her brother's legacy had come full circle. His sacrifice had shaped her kindness had shaped others, and now those others would go on to shape the next generation. Closing note of continuation, Elena's journey didn't end at boot camp or even on the battlefield. It lived on every time she reminded someone that compassion is not weakness, it's the core of true strength. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not the ones carved in medals or written in reports, but the ones written quietly on people's hearts. All right, let's continue Elena's story further, deepening her journey beyond the base, still in English and keeping the heartfelt, inspiring tone. Elena's years as an instructor became some of the most meaningful of her life. She wasn't the loudest voice on the training field nor the strictest. Instead, she led by example. When a recruit stumbled, she was the first to kneel beside them and say, "Stand again. You're stronger than you think." Her method was different but effective. Slowly, the recruits who trained under her began to excel. They didn't just learn discipline and endurance, they learned compassion, teamwork, and resilience. One day, as training wrapped up, the commander who had once recognized her brother approached her quietly. His hair had turned gray since their first meeting, but his voice carried the same authority. "Torres," he said, "I've been watching. You've built something here I haven't seen in years. Soldiers who don't just fight together but care for each other. You've changed this place." Elena felt her throat tighten, but she only nodded. She wasn't doing it for recognition. She was doing it because she remembered what it felt like to be on the outside, mocked and doubted, and she swore no recruit under her watch would feel alone like that. After several years of service, Elena eventually made the difficult decision to retire from the military. The transition was not easy. The silence of civilian life felt strange compared to the constant rhythm of marching boots and shouted commands. But Elena carried her lessons with her. She began working with veterans organizations, helping soldiers returning from deployment adjust back into ordinary life. Many came in broken, haunted by memories, weighed down by invisible scars. Elena listened, encouraged, and reminded them of the same truth she had lived by. Your value isn't measured by your wounds, but by the lives you touch. One evening at a community gathering, she met a young woman whose brother had just joined the army. The girl admitted she was terrified he wouldn't make it. Elena smiled gently, pulling her jacket aside just enough to reveal the edge of her tattoo. "My brother didn't come home," she said softly, "but his spirit carried me through, and I promise you, if your brother has even half the heart, he'll find his strength too." The young woman's tears turned into a smile. For the first time, she believed. Years later, Elena stood at a podium, speaking to a crowd of new recruits and their families. Her voice was calm, steady, but filled with conviction. Strength, she told them, is not about who shouts the loudest or who runs the fastest. It's about the moments no one sees. When you lift someone else, when you choose kindness instead of cruelty, when you carry a weight that isn't yours because it helps someone else stand. That is what makes a soldier. That is what makes a human being. The room rose in applause, and though Elena still felt the ache of her brother's absence, she knew he was there in every clap, every heartbeat, every life touched by the lessons she carried forward. Continuing message. Elena's story didn't end with being mocked at boot camp, or with a tattoo that silenced a room. It lived on through every act of kindness, every soldier she inspired, and every person reminded that compassion can change the course of a life. Because true strength never fades, it multiplies when shared.